in October of '71. And the Allman Brothers had just, we had already recorded Live at Fillmore East, which was rated one of the finest live albums in the history of rock and roll.
In the world of rock music, where legends are usually sculpted over decades, Duane Allman needed only 24 years and a slide guitar to leave America speechless. No grand introductions, no spotlight seeking, he stepped onto the stage as if he'd been there in a past life. His sound, wild, aching, and unlike anything else, was at once a whisper from the roots of classic blues and a scream from a soul that never got to rest. As the founder of the Allman Brothers Band, Duane didn't just shape the sound of Southern rock, he ignited a fire for an entire generation of artists in the American South. In his hands, the slide guitar wasn't a technique, it was a ritual. The riffs he left behind, from Whipping Post to Layla, felt like blades gliding through memory, painful, yet impossible to let go. And then, just as the world began to say his name, Duane died. A motorcycle crash. No alcohol, no drugs, no chaos. Just the fall of a man who ran too fast, lived too fiercely, and never stopped long enough to learn how to stay. So how does an artist who died before 25, with no major scandals and not a single award to his name, become a legend the world still quietly bows to? Join Rock Discovery as we retrace that brief but burning journey. From the memories of a fatherless boy to sleepless nights with a slide guitar and a death that felt like a final, fated glide. And if you've ever felt lost in the noise of this world, perhaps you'll understand why we still can't let go of Duane Allman. Early life. Howard Duane Allman was born on November 20th, 1946 in Nashville, Tennessee, into a middle-class military family. His father, Willis Allman, was a U.S. Army sergeant. When Duane was just 3 years old, tragedy struck. In 1949, during a reunion with former comrades, Willis was shot and killed by a fellow soldier after an argument over money. The sudden death left his mother, Geraldine, to raise 2 young boys alone, Duane and his younger brother, Greg, born just 14 months later. Left without a support system, Geraldine moved the family to Daytona Beach, Florida, where she hoped to find more stable work. They lived in modest rented apartments, never destitute, but marked by the complete absence of a father figure. That void, both emotional and directional, left a deep imprint on Duane's early psyche. Duane and Greg grew up as 2 contrasting reflections in the same mirror. Greg was gentle, introspective, and sensitive. Duane was tough, resourceful, outspoken, and always took the lead, in games and eventually in their musical journey. The brothers were close, though a quiet undercurrent of rivalry was present from early on. Music didn't come from family tradition. It arrived like lightning during a 1960 B.B. King concert in Daytona. That performance flung a door wide open for both boys. Greg soon begged their mother to buy him a Sears Silvertone guitar. Duane borrowed it just to try, then quickly surpassed his brother in skill, even though Greg had started formal lessons first. It wasn't long before Duane dropped out of Seabreeze High School to pursue music full-time, a decision that initially worried their mother, but which she ultimately accepted. She understood that her sons would never walk a stable path. Instead of classrooms, Duane immersed himself in the guitar, particularly slide guitar, a technique that was still rare at the time. He used whatever he could find, a glass bottle, an eyedropper, anything that could glide across strings. He listened to records by Elmore James, Muddy Waters, and especially Robert Johnson, spending hours mimicking each note by ear. No teacher, no textbook, just raw instinct and unfiltered passion. Duane Allman's childhood wasn't dark, nor was it romanticized. It was simply a life shaped by absence, by the silence left after loss, and filled in with music. And from that seemingly hollow space of youth, a great artist quietly began to emerge, steady, sure, and without needing to be named. Early career. In the mid-1960s, while most young Southern men were caught between college and the draft, Duane Allman and his brother Greg were tearing down the dusty roads of Florida, playing music anywhere that paid. Their first band was the Escorts, later renamed the Allman Joys, specializing in covers of popular soul and blues hits of the time. Duane, though not the lead vocalist, naturally took the lead, both technically and in spirit. But their real professional path began when the brothers moved to Los Angeles in the late 1960s and signed with Liberty Records under a new name, Hourglass. They recorded 2 albums that failed commercially, partly because the label pushed them towards soft pop, while Duane yearned to play blues and jam rock, the kind of music he believed was real, was alive. Frustrated with label control and artistic compromise, Duane left Hourglass, walked away from Los Angeles, and returned to the South, while Greg stayed behind to fulfill the contract. It was a turning point few noticed, but one that led Duane into the most creatively fertile period of his career, even if it was largely uncredited. Duane arrived in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, a legendary recording hub known for its gritty soul rock fusion, the birthplace of countless hits by Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, Percy Sledge, and more. There, he became a session guitarist at famed studios, nameless, faceless, unnoticed, yet unforgettable to anyone who heard him play. Duane played like a man telling stories words couldn't express. He didn't show off, never overpowered the vocalist, but somehow made every recording breathe with something unspoken. One of his most striking moments came on the bold reimagining of Hey Jude by Wilson Pickett, a track that Eric Clapton would later say, knocked me out the first time I heard it. That very recording led Clapton to seek Duane out and invite him to join the Derek and the Dominoes project, where Duane would etch his name into rock history with Layla. His slide guitar on the track, raw, unfiltered, gut-wrenching, is still hailed as one of the most soul-stirring solos in rock history. Yet his name wasn't on the album cover, not because he was forgotten, but because Duane was never an official member, just a guest, too brilliant not to invite, yet too free to keep. While others chased the spotlight, Duane chose the shadows of the studio, where no one saw his face, only heard his guitar. And it was there he gathered the confidence, maturity, and conviction to finally do what he'd always wanted: build a band in his own image. No market-driven compromises, no binding contracts, no fear of failure. From an unknown session player in Alabama, Duane Allman was quietly preparing to step into the light, not to become a star, but to ignite the kind of raw, unfiltered music he believed America had yet to truly hear. Career breakthrough. In 1969, as the counterculture movement swept across America, Duane Allman stepped out of the studio shadows to pursue what he had always dreamed of: forming a real band, one where music wasn't dictated by record labels, nor fragmented by fleeting trends, but was simply the voice of the soul. And so, the Allman Brothers Band was born in Macon, Georgia, a small southern town that would soon become the new capital of Southern rock. The band had 6 members: Duane Allman, guitar; Dickie Betts, guitar; Greg Allman, organ lead vocals; Barry Oakley, bass; and 2 drummers, Jai Johanny Johansson, Jai-Mo, and Butch Trucks. From the lineup alone, they were different, not just for their dual lead guitars, but also for having 2 drummers. But it was precisely that complexity that forged their thick, swampy sound, drenched in blues, tinged with jazz, and as free-spirited as a lost country hymn. This wasn't city rock. It was a raw cry from the red clay of the South. Their debut album, The Allman Brothers Band, 1969, wasn't a commercial smash, but it earned critical respect, especially for the seamless interplay between Duane's and Dickie's guitars. For Duane, there was no competition. only dialogue. His mournful slide guitar would speak, and Dickey's bright riffs would answer like sunlight cutting through dense fog. The band followed up with Idlewild South, 1970, which included the hit Midnight Rider, and began gaining traction. But it wasn't until 1971, with the release of their legendary live album at Fillmore East, that Duane Allman and his band transcended southern borders and entered the rock and roll canon. It's no coincidence that At Fillmore East is still hailed by critics as the greatest live album of all time. In an era when musicians labored over perfection in studios, the Allman Brothers chose the vulnerability of the stage, where mistakes could happen, but the emotion was always real. And it was there that Duane shone. No showboating, no grand entrance, just a slide on his finger and a soul that didn't need taming. One of the most iconic moments came during a 20-minute rendition of Whipping Post. Duane led the band through somber blues passages before erupting into piercing slide guitar runs, like blades slicing through grief. The crowd erupted, not for the technique, but because it felt like they were witnessing something sacred, something beyond music. In just 2 years, Duane Allman had transformed from an anonymous session guitarist to the spiritual force behind a new musical movement, Southern rock. But what truly set him apart wasn't fame. It was the way he used music to pull an overlooked region onto the map of American popular culture. Duane once told a friend, "I don't need to be famous. I just need people to hear the real music, from the flesh and blood." He didn't chase trends. He didn't seek big stages. But it was that very refusal to compromise that made him a symbol, an artist who played for the music, not the spotlight. And just as he stood at the height of his brilliance, Duane Allman vanished. Scandals and rumors. Duane Allman was never the kind of artist who thrived on controversy. He didn't lose himself to drugs or messy affairs, nor did he flaunt his personal life on stage. Yet precisely because he lived so fast, so instinctively, and so quietly, his life still bore fractures, subtle, unnamed, but impossible to deny. At the peak of the Allman Brothers Band's success, tensions began to surface, and from none other than his closest companion, his brother. When record label Capricorn offered Gregg Allman a solo recording deal, he signed it without consulting the band. For Duane, it wasn't just a shock. It was a betrayal of the brotherhood he believed was the foundation of everything they'd built. They didn't fight, but they didn't speak for weeks. Gregg would later confess that letting his brother die before they reconciled was the deepest regret of his life. Offstage, Duane kept to himself, but rumors still swirled. Whispers of relationships with young female fans during tours lingered. No accusations, no evidence, just shadows that never quite disappeared. Those close to him insisted he was kind, respectful, and never exploited his position. Still, the murmurings blurred the edges of an otherwise revered figure. Duane wasn't immune to the era's vices either. He loathed heroin and forbade band members from touching it, but frequently used LSD and marijuana. Once, he skipped performances for 3 days, vanishing into the woods to trip alone. When found, he simply said, "I needed to hear myself again." Not an excuse. Just the voice of an artist trying to hold on to something real amid the noise of success and expectation. Around the same time, his legendary performance on Eric Clapton's immortal track, Layla, went uncredited on the album sleeve. Though Clapton later acknowledged Duane as the track's second soul, the omission stirred debate among musicians. Some said he was robbed, others said Duane didn't care. Perhaps both were true, but the wound lingered, like every time he stepped into the shadows so his guitar could be the clearest voice in the room. In the final weeks of his life, Duane began speaking of death more frequently. Not with fear, not for drama, just as a quiet acknowledgement. He told friends, "I don't think I'll live long, but it's okay, as long as what I leave behind stays alive." And then, on an October afternoon in 1971, he swerved his motorcycle to avoid a truck, was thrown from the bike, and never woke up again. No alcohol, no drugs, just a man who lived too fast for a world that moved too slow. Duane Allman didn't need scandals to become a legend. He left behind spaces between himself and his brother, between rumor and truth, between a slide note left unresolved and a fall no one saw coming. And it's in those very spaces that we keep listening, keep mourning, and can never quite let go. Personal life. Duane Allman never married. He had one daughter, Galadriel Allman, born in 1969, the result of a non-committal relationship with a then-girlfriend. Though he always insisted he loved his child, Duane was largely absent during Galadriel's early years. His life was a blur of touring, studio sessions, and all-night jams. Any effort at fatherhood seemed to fall behind, eclipsed by a passion too consuming to be shared: music. Unlike many rock stars of his era, Duane never cultivated a womanizing or rebellious public image. He wasn't photographed with models. He didn't appear in tabloids. But that didn't mean he was happy or at peace. Those close to him described a deeply sensitive, quiet, and easily wounded man. Offstage, Duane would often sit alone for long stretches, silent, withdrawn, as if his mind were always wandering somewhere no one else could reach. Within the band, Duane was the artistic compass but rarely the emotional center. He loved the other members like family, yet always maintained a certain distance. Not out of arrogance, but because he was, by nature, more inward than expressive. Gregg Allman once said, "He was the only person I knew who could go a whole day without saying a word, and then play his guitar. And suddenly, everyone knew exactly what he meant." Motorcycles were an inseparable part of Duane's private world. He wasn't a collector, didn't show off. He simply loved the feeling of speeding alone into the night. No destination, just motion. It was, apart from his guitar, the only place where he felt truly free. But in many ways, that solitude in motion was the perfect metaphor for the way Duane lived, always moving forward, never letting anyone catch up, and never waiting for anyone either. Duane had a few romantic relationships, but never truly settled. He wasn't built for a traditional family life, nor did he try to force one. To him, life always seemed temporary, a rest stop between journeys, an unfinished melody between performances. No anchors, no promises, no words spoken aloud. Years later, as she grew up and sought to understand her father, Galadriel Allman wrote the memoir Please Be With Me, an attempt to connect with the man she knew only through tapes, old photographs, and second-hand stories. She didn't idolize him, nor did she accuse him. She simply painted an honest portrait of a gifted man who never quite learned how to be present in another person's life, not even his daughter's. And perhaps that, too, is part of the truth no legend ever says aloud. Duane Allman lived for music, but never truly lived for anyone else. Among the millions of fans, bandmates, lovers, and roaring applause night after night, he remained a profoundly solitary soul, carrying within him a distant calling no one else could hear, except himself. Death, a fall before he could truly soar. On October 29, 1971, Duane Allman died in a motorcycle accident in Macon, Georgia, the very town where he and his band had been living and recording. He was only 24, just 3 weeks shy of his 25th birthday. That fateful afternoon, Duane was riding his Harley-Davidson Sportster down Hillcrest Avenue when a truck attempted a left turn at an intersection. Witnesses said Duane was riding at considerable speed, and in trying to avoid the truck, he lost control, was thrown into the air, and the motorcycle landed on top of him upon impact. Though he was rushed to the hospital and underwent hours of surgery, he didn't survive. The autopsy confirmed no alcohol or drugs in his system. The death was ruled a pure accident. But to his friends and fans, it wasn't just an accident. It was the loss of a soul burning at its brightest, an artist whose first chapter had barely begun before he vanished. Even more haunting, just a year later, Duane's closest on-stage companion, bassist Barry Oakley, also died in a motorcycle crash on nearly the same stretch of road just blocks away. Two gifted musicians from the same band, gone the same way, in the same place, like a sorrowful curse hanging over the legend of the Allman Brothers Band. After Duane's death, the band was shattered. Gregg Allman, still unreconciled with his brother, nearly collapsed. Dickie Betts couldn't bring himself to pick up his guitar for weeks. Every member felt something vital had been ripped from the band's heart. Though their career continued, it was never whole again. Duane was laid to rest at Rose Hill Cemetery, the same place where the band had once sat for hours, writing their earliest songs. Fans poured into Macon from across the country, bringing flowers, guitars, and tears. They weren't just saying goodbye to an artist. They were mourning the loss of something pure, untamed, and liberating that Duane's music had given them. Eat a Peach, the album released after his death, contained the final recordings Duane made with the band, a wordless farewell, quiet yet haunting. The track Little Martha, a short 2-minute acoustic piece composed and performed by Duane himself, plays like a lullaby for his own spirit. No lyrics, just raw, unadorned guitar, so fragile it feels as though it might dissolve into air. What made Duane's death even more haunting were the things he said in the weeks before he passed. He once told friends, "I don't think I'm gonna live long. But that's okay, as long as what I leave behind stays alive." No one thought much of it at the time. But when the music stopped, it suddenly made sense. Maybe Duane had always known. And maybe for him, music was never a path to glory, but a way to shorten the journey of existence, to live truly, fast, and without regret. Legacy and influence. Duane Allman left behind no extensive solo catalog, no world tours bearing his name, and never received a major music award during his lifetime. But to anyone who has ever heard him play, even just a single riff, a fleeting slide across a live recording, accolades feel irrelevant. Duane didn't need to be honored. He just needed to be heard. And strangely, nearly half a century after his death, the world still holds its breath whenever that sound returns. In both 2003 and again in 2023, Rolling Stone ranked him among the greatest guitarists of all time, placing him at number 9, ahead of many whose careers were longer and far more celebrated. A strange feat for someone who had only a few short years at the top, and died before reaching 25. Duane's impact wasn't about quantity, but the very nature of the music he left behind. In his hands, the slide guitar wasn't a technique. It was a second voice, a way of telling stories that words couldn't contain. From Statesboro Blues and Little Martha to the haunting solo in Layla, Duane established an emotional benchmark that few since have managed to reach. Many legendary musicians have openly cited his influence. Eric Clapton called him a musical soulmate, while Carlos Santana said, "Duane played as if every note was his final prayer." Modern guitarists like Derek Trucks, Warren Haynes, and John Mayer all see him as a spiritual mentor, even though most of them never had the chance to meet him in life. Within the Allman Brothers Band, Duane's name was never replaced. Though the band continued performing after his death, they always left that space in the lineup, not just musically, but as a living tribute. In 1995, when the group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Duane's name was the first to be called, a clear affirmation that the soul of the band had never left. Beyond music, Duane left behind a quiet yet powerful personal legacy, his daughter, Galadriel Allman. She grew up barely knowing who her father was, seeing him only in photographs, old cassette tapes, and scattered recordings. Years later, she wrote the memoir, Please Be With Me, a journey to find the father who never had the chance to be one, and a final bridge between a lost artist and the generation that never knew him firsthand. Duane Allman's legacy isn't printed on charts or etched into trophies. It lives in those who never met him, yet still feel something break open inside when they hear his guitar. It echoes in the way Southern bands dared to play real music, long, loose, and unapologetic. It breathes in the spirit of freedom, resistance, and tenderness, the very things rock music today is slowly forgetting. Duane Allman died before he could turn 25. But instead of fading, his music grew up, expanded, and lived far longer than anyone imagined. As he once said, "As long as what I leave behind stays alive." And clearly, it doesn't just live. It breathes. Duane Allman didn't need a long life to become a legend. Just 24 years, a handful of albums, a slide guitar, and a heart that never compromised. That was enough to carve his name into rock history as someone who arrived fast, lived hard, and left behind an echo louder than those who lived a full century. There's no dedicated hall in his name, no bronze statue in the town square. But in the memory of millions, from longtime Allman Brothers Band fans to young musicians chasing the ghostly voice of the slide guitar, Duane never disappeared. He is the sigh of the American South, the wordless ballad in the night, the scream that gets caught right after the final solo. He never claimed to be a legend, just a man who played guitar, honest, raw, and never waiting for credit. And maybe that's exactly why Duane Allman became an immortal icon, not because of the spotlight, but because he lived like his music, free, unjudging, and always touching the part of us that words can't reach. Share your thoughts about this quiet artist in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Rock Discovery as we continue to uncover those souls who seem to have slipped into oblivion, but whose silent pulse keeps an entire world of music beating.